everyone, my name is Alyssa Shear.
And I'm Ingrid Paredes.
And we're here for March for Science New York City to present work from our team on how current efforts in increasing diversity and inclusion in STEM are failing due to leaky pipeline systems and unfulfilled promises, and how this is especially true for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. A lack of diversity and the presence of racism in STEM are not new issues. There are countless examples of science hiding behind the guise of objectivity in order to back up racist ideals. One example is taking the measurements of skulls in order to create racial hierarchies. Additionally, scientists and physicians have taken advantage of BIPOC bodies and communities. Examples include the lack of informed consent from Henrietta Lacks for her tumor biopsy and the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. We also acknowledge that racism in STEM still persists today, from how researchers collect and analyze their data to environmental racism and medical myths that perpetuate health inequities, such as the maternal mortality rates. In an effort to make STEM more inclusive, the field has tried to increase diversity through pipeline systems to recruit BIPOC students and faculty. However, the data shows that these pipelines are failing. For example, the percent of Black students in chemistry continuously drops throughout their career stages until reaching an abysmal 1.6% of chemistry faculty who are Black. So we must stop and ask ourselves, why is this happening? We argue it's because these pipeline systems have not resolved the root of the issue. In order to answer this question further, we held a three-part discussion series. First, we began with a BIPOC-only discussion, which provided a space to discuss racism in STEM without the need to explain themselves to others. The second discussion was all-inclusive and focused on understanding the complexity of the issue. Both discussions identified barriers to increasing diversity. The final discussion focused on solutions. Our discussion series had a diverse and wide reach. We identified through polls and discussions 2 and 3 that our participants included both students and faculty. Additionally, the data on location of participants was taken from institutional email addresses used to register for the event. And this shows that our participants were from all over New York and all over the country.
In our discussions, we identified 3 issues that perpetuate racism in STEM. The first is a lack of early resources and training. We acknowledge that these issues exist long before students enter higher education and that systemic racism is embedded in our society. The second is a lack of support in higher education. This often comes in the form of a cultural tax that burdens BIPOC students who undertake racial equity and justice work that their white peers typically do not engage in. At the same time, we normalize white cultural traits and values in academia, such as individualism, communication, and networking skills that we assume students acquire organically through their own networks. However, many BIPOC scientists and students do not have access to these opportunities. Together in our chats, we came up with 4 multifaceted solutions rooted in social justice. What these conversations hope to do is move the conversation away from equality and towards equity. The first is to compensate work in racial equity, unlift that burden or cultural tax that many BIPOC students and scientists face. The second is to formalize the acquisition of soft skills such as communication and networking that we value as scientists. This requires support from higher administration in the form of reassessing mentorship and training more diverse mentors, but also asking mentors to take a step back and think about their limitations and own implicit biases, and building accountability into our hiring practices and performance reviews. This can take the form of asking for diversity statements, including mentorship and performance reviews, but at the end of the day, what it comes down to is valuing racial equity work just as much as we value our science. And hopefully with these solutions, what we can then do is even move the conversation further away from equity and towards liberation of our STEM institutions. The conversation that we are having, however, cannot end here. Every racial slur, every microaggression adds to the barriers that exist in STEM. While the suggestions that we provided here today are a starting point, what these solutions look like will look different from institution to institution. And with that, we'd like to thank all of the contributors to our work, all of our Fireside Chat participants and NSPN for having us today, and we'll be available for a Q&A on Saturday at 2:30 for anyone who is available to ask the question, what will you do next?